My name is Andy Hollinden. I live in Bloomington, Indiana. I've lived in Indiana my entire life. I teach for the School of Music at Indiana University. I teach classes on the history of rock music and the history of blues music. I play music, record music, listen to music all day. I'm the father of 2 daughters and the husband of 1 wife. And this is my porch. Well, I was born in a little town on the Ohio River in southern Indiana. A little town of about 8,000 people, but that was the big city in the county. Both of my parents grew up on farms in southern Indiana, in tiny, tiny little towns. Towns about 1/20th the size of the little town that I grew up in. And my town was small. My family had an organ, had a Hammond organ sitting in the corner of the living room like a lot of families did back in the 60s. And my father just showed me how to make chords. For some reason, I was the guy that he showed. My life changed very, very dramatically in one day. I was at the record store in my hometown, and as was my habit, I would just start at the A's and I'd work my way through the entire alphabet. And so I started off at the A's, and I wasn't finding anything I wanted to buy that day. Just nothing was striking my fancy. So anyway, I got all the way through the end of the alphabet, and I come to the Z's, and I see this Frank Zappa album. It was the Apostrophe album. But I took that album home and played it in my bedroom that day, and I just could not believe it. To be quite blunt about it, I'd never heard music like that before in my life. I didn't know anyone wrote music like that any musicians could play music like that. Just couldn't believe it. And as is my nature, after I fell in love with that one Frank Zappa album, I had to own every Frank Zappa album. And began the phase of my life that I refer to as my Zappa disease. I first really started writing my own music when I was about 17 or 18. I spent my entire life savings, and this was in the mid-'70s. I spent about $1,600 to buy a 4-track reel-to-reel tape machine so I could overdub myself being in the entire band. And then when I went away to college, I was studying music composition and obviously writing art music, things that would be performed by, for lack of a better term, classical musicians in a classical setting. But at the same time, I wanted to form a rock and roll band. So I hung up flyers around town, really looking for a vocalist. My older brother was going to play bass, and my best friend Jerry was going to play drums. I was on guitar, and we needed a singer. So I hung up flyers around town advertising for a vocalist to join this punk rock band. And the singer who answered that ad and then got the job was a woman named Erin. And so she became our singer, and before long, she let me know that she liked me. And we've been together ever since.
There she was standing right there.
My wife and I decided to move to Indianapolis. She'd received a job offer, and so had I. I was doing sound and video editing and music production for a video post-production house up there. Anyway, it wasn't a great fit. We didn't really enjoy living in Indianapolis. It seemed kind of big to me, and it seemed a bit cold to me. And I wasn't happy with my living situation. Anyway, everything went haywire in the fall of 1991 when I was diagnosed with cancer. So I was quite shocked by that. Quite shocked to be being given a cancer diagnosis, because especially back in those days, the word cancer basically was synonymous with death. And when I came out of that, I quit my job. My wife and I bought a home, and most importantly, had children. And so this cancer situation, as harrowing as it was, and as life-changing as it was, I do believe that it made things better on the big picture. So I approached the School of Music here and and I said to them, you know, I want to live back in Bloomington again. I want to be teaching here. I want to be at IU again. I can develop courses on the history of rock music for you, a class on the music of Frank Zappa for you, a class on the music of Jimi Hendrix for you. I want to be here full time. And that's exactly what happened. I teach about 1,000 students a year that I feel like their lives are being enriched. And I don't feel like I'm bragging when I say that or being boastful, because they tell me so. There's a phenomenal amount of music out there, and people just aren't being exposed to it properly. If the media did its job, there'd be less of a need for guys like me. The pieces on Heat of Fragrance are all over the map stylistically. It's not a cohesive album for the person who wants to hear one style. The second solo CD that I released was called Begging's Not Endearing. The whole purpose behind that record was, what can one guy do with a couple computers, a fairly decent sampler, a whole battery of regular instruments, and a loop library? I think if a person wants to understand my sense of melody and harmony and production, Begging's Not Endearing is probably the most pure. It was around this time that I became interested in roots music. And so I became interested in country blues, guitar, fingerstyle, acoustic music, American primitive, specifically the guitar playing of John Fahey. So I set out to learn how to play acoustic fingerstyle guitar, and then decided, well, I'll write an album's worth of material in this new guitar style that I've just learned. That I wanted to make a rock band album, a guitar album, for the combination of two guitars, bass, and drums, which I consider the string quartet of the 20th century. And I wanted it to be just loud and in your face. In 2008, I released a record called Grief for the Living. And Grief for the Living was a collection of songs, a song cycle, on the nature of beliefs. There's a song on Grief for the Living called My Teacher Told Me Once, which addresses this concept of beliefs that you're given. I always ask people, what do you believe? And do you hold beliefs to be true that are actually in contradiction to one another? And shouldn't your belief system be pruned like a plant? And as the beliefs go brown like a bad leaf, shouldn't they be plucked aside for the benefit of the organism? The record that came out in the spring of 2010 was called Lucky Hands in Trying Times. And it was my first true collaboration. And so we got together and started bringing songs to the table and really collaborated on the production and on the part writing. Really striving for an organic sound, to make a record that just had that vibe that I grew up with. And I think we achieved that. I'm not the type of person to stand over graves. I don't visit cemeteries and get somber that way. And so I would hope that anyone who wants to visit me in the future would do so through their other senses, that they don't have to travel to somewhere and stand in a field of headstones, that they can just pop some music into their sound system.